I want to bring in my next guest. His name is Zander Masser. I know Zander through my business life, in fact, and Zander is an excellent occupational therapist helping families age at home longer. In fact, we're going to be talking to Zander a little later in the show about this. However, when talking to him, I learned a lot more about him and his special bond with his father. It was so special, he created and published a fascinating book called Unburying. To tell us more about it, let's bring Zander in. Zander, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Zander, thanks for coming to the studio here on Father's Day. You are a busy dad with two very young children, and I appreciate you coming in, telling a wonderful story, a personal story for you, family. Tell us a little bit about your dad.
Sure. So my dad, his name was Randy, and he was a professional photographer from 1975 until he died in January of 2000. And he was a fun-loving, universally loved, really easygoing, great, wonderful dad. And he was also a very talented artist who was a professional photographer. And after he died, he left behind a whole trove of photos for me and my family to go through.
Well, something else, what you've done with this, of over 10,000, I believe. So tell us about how, and it must have been a fascinating experience for you and your family, and tell us how you literally unburied your dad's life.
Sure. So I was 14 when my dad died. It took me 10 years to go back into the basement of my home where everything was kind of lying in a pile, buried. And my brother and I unburied, like you said, 10,000 positives, negatives, prints, all the photos you could imagine. It took me another 10 years after that to actually figure out what to do with these photos. And so finding the photos is what prompted me to want to learn more about my father's story. And that was the impetus for the book.
Fascinating story at that. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio. We're here talking with Zander Masser, but amazing story with his father who passed away, and you were young, 14 years old. He got caught up, your dad, with the blood scandal, actually died of HIV, of AIDS, correct?
That's
From what
right.
I understand. Yeah. And this is in the time, in like 2000, year 2000. And so it must have been devastating for your family. And here you are, I could understand 10 years just to get into that basement, 10 years to put it all together. I'm holding the book right now. It is an amazing book, incredible photographs, everything that you've done there. So describe it to us.
Sure. So when I had all these photos with me, I created the archive, and I realized while I wanted to share the photos, I didn't really know that much about my dad. And so I ended up reaching out to about 50 people that knew him and asked to share stories about his life. And so 20 years after he died, I ended up learning my dad's story and finding out so much about him that I never knew. And the beautiful thing about that is it allowed me to realize, while I lived for 20 years knowing in my mind that his death was the identifying thing in my life, what was actually true was his life is what I really identified with. And I learned how I was similar to him and all the things that I got from him and the life that he lived.
You know, it's interesting because I'm sure, and I know this, here you are, you're an occupational therapist by trade, a family man. However, I'm sure you learned a lot about yourself as well. And going through this 20-year process, all these photographs, I'm sure it was a way for you to grieve and deal with the grief. Like you found a way, other people find other ways. So tell us how that's helped you with your grieving process.
Sure. Very quickly, I've tried doing talk therapy over the course of many years. And while I've found that helpful, I found actually doing a creative project is what really kind of set me free. The fact that I'm sitting right now with you talking about this is so contrary to what my grief used to look like, which was silent, lonely, isolated. Now that I've done this project, it's open, it's sharing, and I can so much more easily talk about my experience. And I can't tell you how freeing and healing that's been for me.
I want to talk a little bit more about the book, and I'm talking with Zander Masser here on Life Unrehearsed. And Zander, as you might have heard, his dad passed away. Took him a while, but he was a professional photographer, over 10,000 photographs, slides, and so on. not to put you on the spot, but I will here. If you had to select one or two photographs going through this process, was there any one or two that stood out in your mind?
That's a really great question. I would say that there are probably about 1 to 5 that I recognize from my childhood. So I grew up with his photos. I was surrounded by them on the walls of my childhood home. So to see the original, either the print or the photo positive with his handwriting on it and his organization system on there, really, like when the one or two would pop into my view, like I really felt a lot, and it brought me back to many moments in my childhood. I would say one would be a photo of a taxi cab in New York City, and the other was encapsulating of his New York City street photography style.
Amazing. From New York, now you're living in, found the love of your life, right? Living here in Montreal,
That's
Zander,
right.
and two young children, and that's where the New York connection is with your dad.
Yeah.
And just very, very quickly and good on you. You found a way to grieve, and today's a celebration. It's Father's Day. However, there are many of our listeners that no longer have their father, so I wanted to dedicate this segment to those fathers that are no longer with us. And you're a great example of how you've coped with it. And this is not your specialty, but you're even getting the word out on helping others, and explain a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I found this process so cathartic that I felt really compelled to figure out a way to share it with other people. And so I've taken my creative process, broken it down into very specific steps, and turned it into a grief workshop. And so I've delivered it a few times. It's on the internet, and I do it in person, and it's been a great way to share this.
And so let's share that. So there's two things. I want to ask how
Sure.
we can get a hold of the book, but specifically for the grieving project, where can our listeners find out more information?
So if they want to find it on the internet, it's on LinkedIn Learning, and it's called Navigating Grief Through Creativity.
Okay, wonderful. And if our listeners want to get a hold of this incredible book called Unburying My Father, where can we go?
So you can go to randymasserphoto.com, or you can simply Google Unburying My Father, and it will show up.